You know what, I'm really starting to love Capcom these days. A good few years ago they were in many gamers' bad books thanks to their treatment of Mega Man, as well as their misguided attempts to put all their eggs in one basket and go full blockbuster with their titles, and aiming to please a more casual audience. This past year or two has been amazing from them though, and one of the perfect examples of this is Onimusha Warlords. Seeing this on a HD console is unexpected and exciting, and we're gonna see how it holds up to this day. Before we get into it, consider subscribing to our Switch focused channel. We work hard to produce the best Switch reviews and features for you guys in the Switch community. Let's get on with it. The story for Onimusha is one based on historical fantasy. An oxymoron for sure, but it works well. Set in the very famous feudal era of Japanese history, a samurai called Samanosuke Akechi is called for help in regards to the mysterious disappearances of the Princess Yuki's servants. As Samanosuke arrives on the scene, it's clear that he is a little too late as things have taken a nosedive with the princess being taken. Accompanied by a young ninja girl, they set out to rescue the princess and destroy the demons invading the castle and solving the mysteries surrounding their origins. Onimusha is very much a Capcom game of its era. It's an intriguing story and one that you'll enjoy following if you've never played Onimusha before. It reminds me of Resident Evil in a sense, which is an obvious comparison considering it did start out live as a spin-off to that series. The story has the same kind of beats and evolving mystery that does not outstay its welcome. Much of the background of the story is told through messages strewn around, but there are plenty of cutscenes with different characters and that really enhances it. I really enjoyed this story, it was very intriguing and mysterious. What more could you ask for? The gameplay is a more action-orientated version of the classic Resident Evil games. It's like a bridge gap between Resident Evil and Devil May Cry in many respects. It has fixed camera angles for a start, which helps solidify the slight horror feeling to the game, and it does have tank controls, although we do have an updated control scheme for this release to include more natural controls. The tank controls are on the D-pad while the updated ones are on the analog stick. Whether you prefer either of the control schemes is up to you. I'm not sure the updated controls are a solution to the problem since it's often flummoxed by the ever-changing camera angles. While I'm not adverse to tank controls myself, I did find myself using the more updated ones in my playtime, and only using the old ones during a few of the more precise puzzles that required stepping on specific areas. As you traverse the castle and its surrounding grounds in search of the princess, you'll be greeted with a mixture of puzzle solving and demon battling. The combat is a fairly big focus and thankfully it's fairly enjoyable if a little antiquated. You have a basic attack button which makes it more like of a hack and slash as you don't really need to input combos. What I like about the battle against the varied demon species is that combat can be fairly slow paced. Each one is almost like a standoff. It's not like your Dynasty Warriors game or anything where you hack and slash a million monsters. You will have to plan your battle and be wary at all times, otherwise you'll be finding yourself dying a fair bit. Blocking is very important, something that I found early on. This is especially important during boss battles where you cannot just charge in or you will die. Upon defeating foes, you are awarded orbs of all different colours that can improve your XP as well as heal you or rejuvenate your magic. This is not automatic though and needs to be done with holding a button. This seems a bit old fashioned at first, but it makes a lot of sense actually, seeing as the orbs will eventually disappear if you're not quick enough. And it adds a tactical layer or decision that you need to make. Do you step back and try to absorb them, or do you keep on battling to take all the enemies out first? Again, during boss battles you will need to take a breather to absorb some stuff. You can pretty much get by being deft with the combat, at least in a one-on-one situation. When it comes to fighting multiple demons at once, you'll probably want to make use of the magic attacks that each of the equipable weapons hold. Whether thunder, wind or fire, each with varying power, you can use these magic attacks to spread the battle and ease yourself of the burden of being overwhelmed by too many foes. Again, there's not huge depth here, but it's nice and keeps it simple. Despite being an action game, it still feels rather limited or archaic than what you might be used to with modern games, even ones from the same time period. You can't jump, for instance, nor is there a dodge roll. There is an awkward kind of sidestep that you do, but it hardly comes in handy for the most part. I think a lot of you will get frustrated at times with how the game controls. There is upgrading to do for your weapons and magic, and the latter is imperative for the fact that you can't unlock some doors until you've leveled certain magic up to a point. To level stuff up, you just need to head to a save point and enhance from there. I'm not sure how I feel about this aspect, since if you level up too many wrong things at once, you may have to grind orbs from enemies for a long time. This never happened to me in my playthrough, but I was always worried about the potential. At points in this game, you'll take control of Keida, who is like a faster version of Samanosuke. Not surprising considering her role as a ninja. In some ways she's more interesting to play as thanks to her backflip and the throat slit abilities, which makes the game feel more advanced than it otherwise is. If I'm going to be critical, I think the game should have involved her even more. The puzzles found around the castle are hardly brain teasers, but they do well to change the pace of the game. I didn't find myself getting stuck too much due to the pretty linear progression of the game. There is one very brutal tile sliding puzzle that I needed multiple attempts to do though, but that's because I absolutely suck at those types of puzzles, so that's my own fault. All of the areas in the game are connected and you can traverse between them, and indeed there is a little bit of backtracking here and there, but I think it's difficult to get lost or stuck in terms of progressing. I know that Onimusha is considered to be in the horror genre somewhat, and although there is plenty of creepy imagery here and there combined with the music, I wouldn't say that it's an outright horror game. It can be a little bit on edge at times, but I don't think you scaredy cats like me will have too much of an issue playing through it. I didn't, and I'm a wuss. I think what adds to the atmosphere is the very claustrophobic space in which you will be exploring and fighting in. The fact that hiding or running isn't always an option because of how cramped it can be adds to the tension rather than the horror. Maybe it's because I'm used to far more shocking or gruesome video games these days, but Onimusha is very tame, so don't worry about that. Overall, the gameplay is very fun, if a little arcade these days. I guess comparing it to something like Bloodborne or any of those type of games is unfair considering the advancements in technology and development teams. It is a lot of fun though, although, as I've said, some of you may be a little frustrated by some of the stiffness, but it's a step back in the past worth having, I feel. The fixed camera angles may also irk many gamers who aren't used to not being able to see the enemies at all times. When you're sometimes swiping in the darkness attacking God knows what, then the game does have its issues. From a visual standpoint, Onimusha may not be the greatest looking game in the world these days. Back in the day it was a bit of a looker as it utilizes pre-rendered backgrounds. On smaller CRT TVs, it looks great, I'm sure. My memory is a little bit blurry, but I'm sure I would have been well impressed from a 2001 game. Now blown up on big TVs, it's obviously not aged perfectly. The backgrounds are very blurry and pixelated. It's not great if I'm being honest, and I think the team that ported this maybe had very little to work with in terms of what they could offer. The character models look fine, although kind of stick out like a sore thumb from the background these days, the game design being revealed by the sharpness of today's TVs. Overall, I'm not overly enthusiastic about the treatment the game has received from the transition between standard definition and high definition. I think more could have been done, but as someone who played games from this era, it doesn't bother me too much. Maybe younger people will be put off by it. It's not in the same league as the port of Okami, for example, but those are very different games. And also, aside from the opening, the mid-game cutscenes hold up very poorly. Performance-wise, Onimusha seems to run very smoothly as you would expect. Still, you can never be too sure. Looking at something like Katamari, which is also a PS2 release, and had a hiccup here or two on the Nintendo Switch a few weeks ago. The soundtrack to Onimusha is fantastic. What should be noted is that Onimusha has a very interesting history with its soundtrack. The soundtrack in this HD release has been redone, not out of enthusiasm to do better, but because the credited composer of the original game, Mamoru Samuragochi, was a complete fraud. The original soundtrack was absolutely fantastic, but it was written by a ghostwriter, Takashi Nigaki. It turns out Mamoru was living a lie, and he was pretending to be like a new age Beethoven as a deaf composer to enhance his status, but in fact, no, he wasn't deaf. I highly advise that you read up on that situation because it's genuinely astounding. I'm a bit ambivalent about this change of soundtrack because the original soundtrack was very good. I'm not exaggerating, despite it not being written by the person it was supposed to be written by. The new one is pretty good too, and it still retains the style of what it's going for, utilizing the Japanese historical theme very well, with traditional instrumentation of the time. There is voice acting here too, both Japanese and English are available. Personally, I just played with the English, which is a mixed bag. Some are okay, but there is a lot of cheesiness too that even other Capcom classics would be proud of. For value, well, I do need to applaud Capcom for their pricing stance on the releasing of their old games. At £15.99 in the UK and $19.99 in the US, I'm very happy with how Capcom are handling this, and games such as Okami, which are priced perfectly, not overpriced and not so low that it is insulting to what the game is. Onimusha Warlords is at a sweet spot for what it is as a classic, one overlooked at that these days. Had this been a Nintendo game, this would have no doubt been 3 times the price, if not more, and I think Onimusha is certainly worth that hard-earned cash of yours. And is well worth supporting to show Capcom they are doing the right thing here. Sure, it's not the longest game in the world, and as long as you don't get stuck, you'll be finishing this up in a couple of sessions, but I think it's worth it for sure. It's worth noting that Onimusha has received a physical release in Japan. Sadly, the West seems to have missed out on this one, but I know you collectors love a good physical copy in your collection, so head over to Play Asia or somewhere where you can purchase a physical copy for import. Before we get into my final thoughts, please consider subscribing to our channel to keep up to date with the latest greatest Nintendo Switch content. It's well worth it for you Switch owners, I promise. Overall, while Onimusha may not have aged as gracefully as some other games of the era, it's definitely worth a playthrough to experience what was a fantastic, compelling release at the time. This HD release may not have done much to enhance the experience over the original, but it's enough for those who may have missed it the first time around, or would prefer a more accessible way to play. It's not the longest game in the world, but at an affordable price, and fun, if slightly archaic gameplay, makes this a recommended 8 out of 10. Let's hope the rest of the series follows shortly. If you're into PS2 re-releases, then head over to watch my review of Katamari Damacy, which I did a couple of weeks ago. I'll see you guys over there. Take care.